I'm very proud of it. But thank you for that honor. And signed an agreement to establish a permanent maritime boundary between your two countries. I think it's a historic breakthrough. It took a lot of courage for you to step up and step into it. It took some real guts, and I think it took principle and persistent diplomacy to get it done. And I compliment you, and I compliment the government. This agreement is going to allow the development of energy fields and for both countries, and it's going to create new hope and economic opportunities for the people of Lebanon, enhance the stability and security of the people of Israel, in my view. I've been, as you probably know, I've been working on this since I was Vice President of the United States, and I really compliment you. We're also going to discuss the ironclad commitment, and this is, I'll say this 5,000 times in my career, the ironclad commitment the United States has to Israel based on our principles, our ideas, our values. They're the same values. And I've often said, Mr. President, if there were not an Israel, we'd have to invent one.
Thank you.
And I told you before, my dad was a righteous Christian who we used to sit for dinner to have conversation and incidentally eat. And I remember even when I was a teenager, my dad talking about how we should have done so much more. Why didn't we bomb the railroad tracks? Why didn't we so on?
In World War II.
In World War II. And so it's a deep shared concern. And so we have bedrock values and interests, and I'm going to hope we get to talk about those a little bit today. And I think our interests are pretty consistent around the world and in the region. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank you wholeheartedly for your hospitality, for inviting me here. It's an expression of true friendship. And we had the enormous pleasure of hosting you at the President's home and in Israel at large a few weeks ago. It was a true moment of pleasure for the people of Israel. And I also think it was one hell of a pleasure for you too, as far as I could get it. You are a true friend of Israel, Mr. President, and the United States is our closest, strongest historical ally. And I'm very proud to come here as the head of state of the State of Israel to express my feelings of friendship and bonding and the unbreakable bond between our nations. You know, Mr. President, today marks 40 days to the killing of Mahsa, a young Iranian woman who protested, and today the Iranian regime is crushing thousands of Iranian citizens, young men and women, who are demonstrating and simply pleading to have their own liberties. And this is an example of the way Iran is working, crushing its own citizens, moving towards nuclear weapons, and supplying lethal weapons that are killing innocent citizens in Ukraine. And I think the Iranian challenge will be a major challenge which we will be discussing. I want to thank you, Mr. President, and the administration for moving forward and carving the deal between Israel and Lebanon on the maritime borders. And we appreciate the effort and of course, the bringing it to fruition tomorrow. We will also be discussing the inclusion and integration of Israel in the region, in the Middle East, as we see more and more nations coming on board and cooperating with Israel in so many fields. For one item that you and I will participate together with leaders from all over the world in the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt a few weeks down the road, I think the climate change challenge can serve as a common denominator for so many nations and also between Israel and the United States. And finally, Mr. President, you know, we have elections in Israel and you are having midterm elections in the United States. But one thing is clear, and I think this visit epitomizes it best, is that our friendship and strong bond transcends all political differences and opinions and parties. And I hope that together we can continue to work towards the well-being of the State of Israel, the United States, and the world at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The presidents of Israel and the United States sitting there in the Oval Office. Their discussion is part of President Isaac Herzog's first visit to Washington as president. And as we've been discussing here just moments beforehand, those topics were pretty predictable, and that expression, Joe Biden, Owen Alterman said it in his own words. He said it 5,000 times before, but it's still music to the ears of Israelis, that he said that the commitment, the ironclad commitment between Israel and the U.S. remains, and that is crucial regardless of what is happening. Break down what stood out for you. They look very relaxed together.
That's right. Well, you're right. If you had your bingo card out, you're checking off the boxes as you went through Joe Biden's talk. But you're right. We shouldn't be sarcastic about it. Obviously, it is meaningful to Israelis, even if these have become cliches in settings like this one. They obviously have deep meaning, and the U.S.-Israel relationship is deeply important to Israel and to its future. And it's always wonderful to see it celebrated in the Oval Office, as it just was, as we just saw. And I think when Joe Biden says this, I think it has meaning to Israelis, because I think more than some of his Democratic predecessors, certainly with Barack Obama, who did some very, very important and meaningful things for Israel. But there was always this lingering question about whether he really believed it in his heart and whether he was really personally committed to the relationship. Whether those questions were fair, whether they weren't fair, they were always out there. And of course, Obama did forge the original Iran nuclear deal, which was a very meaningful development in the relations between the United States and Israel. When Joe Biden comes there after decades in Washington and decades of public service, and after more than a year and a half of service in the White House and the way he has handled his relations with Israel, I think there is a real sense of warmth, and I think it's greeted in a certain way. One senses, I don't think there's a lot of polling on this, Benita, but one senses that Joe Biden is actually fairly popular here. May not have gotten to the highs that Donald Trump reached at certain parts of his presidency, but I think it is warmly received here in Israel. Certainly was when he came over the course of in July on his visit here. So again, it is a meaningful event. And you're right, when Isaac Herzog comes up, we see what Israel's priorities are in a setting like this one, and the messages Israel wants to use in giving its elevator pitch, right, to Joe Biden and the world. First of all, Iran and the Iranian protests and the Iranian issue writ large, which has now gone beyond the nuclear issue. And then, yes, the issue of Israel's integration in the region, the issue of the Abraham Accords, the Negev Forum, and so forth, and an issue of personal importance to the president, this issue of climate change. We're just about 2 weeks away from the Sharm el-Sheikh climate conference, which will be happening in Israel's doorstep. Israel will certainly be represented there. And this idea of using climate change to build relationships within the region, it's an important initiative for President Isaac Herzog himself.
And we do know that both these leaders are likely to give live remarks a little later in the coming hours. And if and when that does happen, we will go back live to Washington. Right now, we're going to leave it. Thank you so much to our senior diplomatic correspondent.